Another day, another massive Wayland oversight is in the process of being addressed. Now, I wouldn't say process of being fixed. The problem is acknowledged, and there is currently an ongoing discussion. But you'll see in a bit the discussion, it's going, we'll say that. This time, it's related to how windows are placed on your screen. This is a problem that has always been present in Wayland, but first started getting a lot of attention when this issue was made in the MPV project. Window XY offsets, specified through geometry, ignored on Wayland. So normally when you spawn a window, whether that's on Muttering GNOME, Kwin and Plasma, or any standalone window manager, the window manager controls where that window is going to be placed. But MPV and a bunch of other programs have the ability to specify where they want the windows to be. And normally, outside of a tiling window manager which does things in a very specific way, the window would be placed where you want it to be. And this isn't just a Linux Xorg thing. This works just fine on Windows, it works just fine on macOS, with the exception of macOS doing their coordinates weirdly. They do it backwards. But besides that, it places the window where you say to place it. And on Linux with Xorg, it works just fine as well. Now, on the Wayland side, there is no way to generically do this. Some compositors might have their own specific solutions, but there is no Wayland protocol that is generic to every compositor that is going to allow this. This had a bit of back and forth in the MPV repo, and eventually they realized, yeah, there's nothing we can actually do on our side. The only thing that can be done is dealing with it in Wayland. So, the original poster made an issue about it. Add support for positioning clients in outputs. This is the original issue. Some clients, apps, windows, whatever term you want to use, offer the capability to position themselves at absolute XY locations in an output or relative to the output's bounds, so relative to the edge of the screen. From the user's perspective, this is usually accomplished with a geometry shell option or a similar configuration parameter, this example being for xterm. While X11 supports this behavior, to my knowledge, similar implementation does not exist in XDG shell or any other Wayland protocols. I'm attaching a reference to the MPV issue which led to the creation of this proposal. Whilst this very clearly explains the problem that MPV is having, it wasn't a very compelling explanation, with the first response being from Simon Sir, this doesn't seem like a compelling use case. The use case to position a client at a requested location is simple and quite frequently occurring in the wild, e.g. in media players, instant messengers, terminal emulators. Why do these clients need to set their position? And this ultimately set the tone of the rest of the thread. This user was very well intentioned and just wanted the problem that they and many other users had to be fixed. The problem is they admittedly were not very knowledgeable about Wayland protocols. This led to a lot of the points they brought up basically just being shot down. They didn't really understand the other protocols that exist. Like, there were other protocols in the works doing part of what they wanted, so maybe this protocol doesn't make sense and that protocol should be used instead. Do we really want all of these things to be here? Does this really fit into, like, the overall goal of Wayland and the Wayland protocols? And for a while, that back and forth pretty much just went nowhere useful. That's until Matthias Klump showed up. And Matthias took the problem into their own hands. Add support for positioning clients in outputs was just an issue, so they went and made a merge request. This was from 4 days ago. Now, you might notice that this is from a year ago. Matthias seems like a busy person that has other things going on in their life, so it's taken a bit to get here. But now we have draft. Add xdg-placement protocol to allow client window placement hints. We might deep dive into the implementation details at a later date, but right now when things are still being like sorted through and not really sure exactly what this is going to entail, we'll just focus on the intention of the protocol. So this is an extension to the XDG shell protocol. XDG shell is a core part of the Wayland specification. This will allow clients to request the current output and absolute XY position for their own top-level windows from the compositor. Basically, the application can say, hey, which monitor am I on, and where am I actually located? This will also allow clients to suggest to the compositor to place a top-level window at a specific output and XY position. They can suggest where they want the window to actually be. This will ensure the compositor always has the final say about placement, and the client may only provide hints. That is a really big part here. When we are talking about a floating window manager, it generally doesn't matter where a window spawns. You're going to move it into the location you actually want it to be in. But even then, you might have window rules where you say, okay, I want X window, I want Discord, for example, to always spawn on this monitor and always spawn at this size. The application should not be able to say, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do something else. The compositor should always have the final say, and this is especially true in a tiling context. You don't want Windows to just suddenly start choosing where they want to go and completely ignore the tiling rules. But if those rules don't exist and the window says, hey, I want to be on monitor 3 and I want to be this size, well, if there's no reason why they shouldn't be, just let them have it. Now, a core problem with the original issue is MPV and Xterm is a really weak argument for a whole new Wayland protocol. Matthias has something a bit stronger. I work in scientific research, and there is a lot of apps which follow a multi-window approach, some of which run on Linux, which we cannot properly port to Wayland unless either severely degrading the user experience or rewriting the UI entirely. Both isn't feasible, so these apps are stuck on X11 at the moment. For example, Lazarus IDE, a Pascal IDE, GIMP in multi-window mode. There are tools like Scintillos, a data acquisition tool, Mesospin, which I don't even know what this thing is. This is some, very scientific tool. Huygens, once again, I have no idea what this does, and ImageJ. All of these applications make use of this multi-window paradigm. These windows here aren't separate applications that are open. These are part of the same application, like GIMP in multi-window mode, which I believe on Windows is the default way it is used. So all of these individual tools are their own floating windows, which when you spawn a new window, you expect to be in a certain location. I offer my own example. OBS with browser docs. So browser docs can either be embedded directly into the window, or they can be floating separate from the window. And if I have things like my stream chat, or my stream notifications, or stream metrics, or something like that, when I spawn that window, I want it to be where I expect it to be. Now, reopening the application and it remembering where all the windows were, and opening a new window and it spawning where you expect it to be, are two completely separate things. The first one is being worked on. That one probably will be dealt with. Staging Add XDG Session Management Protocol. This is for restoring where windows were, but some of these applications will spawn windows based on where the other windows are. For example, Scintillos. This is a scientific application for data acquisition, which is using multiple windows that open and close depending on user requirements. New windows should, and do on X11, pop up on specific positions next to other windows and click positions, and the positions are remembered on a per experiment basis and restored if that experiment configuration is loaded again. For example, for one experiment, you want your camera image magnified on screen 2 and your sensor displays stacked on screen 1. And for a different experiment, this might be reversed. Currently on Wayland, users need to rearrange their windows every single time they load a configuration, which is extremely annoying and made us switch back to X11. Depending on the window manager you're using, sometimes they'll just all spawn stacked on top of each other, sometimes they'll be placed around randomly. There's no consistency, and that's the problem. This style of doing these multi-window applications isn't the most common way of doing things nowadays, and this was acknowledged in the previous thread. I get the impression that this style of application with multiple windows positioned relative to each other used to be a common paradigm, but has generally fallen out of favor. It's more standard now for applications to place everything in a single window while offering ways to resize and move things within the application's window. For instance, GIMP traditionally worked that way, but introduced a single window mode a while ago, and that's the way that I generally am using it. The multi-window design generally clashes with how tiling window managers work, and doesn't necessarily seem well handled in general. And yes, he is right that it does play weirdly with tilers. Honestly, a lot of things play weirdly with tilers, like play a video game that has a launcher, and just see what happens to that launcher if it's not put in floating mode. Sometimes it's fine. Other times, well, you're finding a new game to play. And yes, he is absolutely right that this isn't the most common way to do things. But Matthias has a good point here. I don't think the Wayland should have any bias as to what style of application is favorable or not. Ideally, it should be agnostic to that, especially given that a lot of these apps exist in the X11 world and Windows world, which have a hard time to be ported to Wayland. The Windows part is especially true. Once we go fully down the Wayland route, if there is not a way to do this, and, 5-10 years in the future when Xorg completely vanishes, I would not be surprised if a lot of these apps simply just don't get ported to Linux because they simply cannot work properly. And of course you could argue that all of these applications should be written from the ground up, but especially in science, this is not feasible. There are a lot of really overworked people that don't have time to rewrite stuff. They are just going to use the system that they know works, so they don't have to spend another 20 hours that they simply just don't have. Developing one of these apps, I can also say that transforming them into a single window app would be technically challenging, as there are multiple binaries actually drawing the GUI under the hood. Also, for the scenarios these apps are used in, the multi-window approach is actually very desirable and the best UI you can design to make use of multiple screens and large display space. That's the other thing. If you have a single window, good luck using that across multiple monitors, especially if there are some vertical monitors in there as well. There is no simple way to just make a single window app work for that. Now, if it was just Windows, macOS, and X11, that would be bad enough. But then, the web had to come in to make things just a tiny bit worse for the Wayland approach. Because multiple screens and window placement is super useful for scientific and monitoring apps, and the web wants to be a runtime for everything nowadays, there of course is also a W3C draft to allow web applications to place windows on specific screens. Window Management by W3C. So this would be a way for a website to pop additional windows outside of your browser that can then be just moved around like any other window on your system. Plus, they have some use cases. A slideshow app presents on a projector and shows speaker notes on a laptop screen. Financial app opens a dashboard of windows across multiple monitors. A medical app opens, say, X-rays on a high-resolution grayscale display. Creativity app shows secondary window, e.g. a palette, on a second screen. And all of these other things, many of which are already being used in the desktop space, this would just expand it out to the web space. And considering the whole, the web is the environment for everything, a lot of application developers are not making native applications, I would expect this to be a very popular feature. So whether anyone involved in Wayland likes the idea of a multi-window application, it doesn't matter. It's supported on Windows, it's supported on macOS, it's supported on X11, and at some point in the future, it's probably going to be supported on the web. So it's pretty much here to stay at this point. And I would prefer if these applications work the way the user expects them to. Now, being Wayland, there is also the security component. Now, I know a lot of people just don't really care about that, especially if you're still an X11 user, but it is important here. Fooling users by mimicking UI elements. I do not think this is a realistic scenario. To put the window over a password input or any other sort of sensitive field, the application would first need to run at all, locally, which is already a huge breach if a malicious app managed to do that, and then would somehow need to find out what the password field even is. For that, it needs elevated permissions already to screen grab the content of a screen. This is something that is done through pipewire video capture and needs to be asked of the user to be allowed to happen, which Wayland rightfully prevents by default. Even then, the compositor could deny the position request for any application that does not draw a title bar to easily mitigate this, or ensure a shadow is drawn around a floating borderless window to visibly distinguish it. Basically, the compositor can make it so windows are not allowed to spawn in places where there could be a problem. Now, this is something that would take a bit of effort to get done, but I think just not allowing invisible windows to spawn over other windows is probably a good start. And tracking users via window positioning. This could be an extra data point used in fingerprinting a user. Two problems though. Firstly, the only window the application could find out location of is its own window. It couldn't query for the positions of other windows on your system unless they are also owned by that application. So if you're running some malicious app A and you've got OBS open, it couldn't say, hey, where is that OBS window? It could only know where all of its windows are. The other problem is if an application is running on your system, it already has the ability to read your home directory and all of this other data on your system. So technically, yes, it's this extra little data point that could be a problem. But considering all of the other data a malicious app can already get access to, it is such a tiny little data point that it's not a realistic problem. He even goes out of his way to preemptively answer some questions. Why not use the XDG Session Management Protocol? This is the protocol that remembers where an application window was, so when you reopen the window, it's still in that location. This works great for that use case, but it cannot be applied here because it has no knowledge where to place a new window on its initial creation, while the application has the necessary context available to place it somewhere that works for its UI design. Additionally, you might not just have a single way you want to reload the windows. You might have different application profiles, we'll say, where, let's say for a video editor, where you have a color grading profile, a audio work profile, a timeline profile, and you want to be able to swap between those profiles and have the windows placed where you expect them to be. This could technically probably be done with the Session Management Protocol, but involves complicated negotiation between the compositor and client to handle multiple profiles for the same set of windows, and at that point, the client might as well just tell the compositor where it likes to have new windows displayed, which would be a lot less error-prone. Why absolute positioning, as in an XY location? Wouldn't relative positions be enough? That was my initial design. It would have allowed clients to make a request like, place this window to the right, left, top, bottom of an existing window of the same app. And clients could have cheesed this method to have windows end up exactly where they wanted them to be. They could have used like invisible windows that act as kind of like a buffer. It would be a mess though. It was incompatible with how apps currently handle window placement. On Windows, on macOS, on X11, they can say where they want the windows to be. So it would have required extra porting work, and we still would have lost compatibility with proprietary and Windows apps. Shouldn't this be a dbus call that we can permission control? The set preferred placement method should be called before the window is displayed. With dbus, we would have a non-zero chance of the window flying across the screen to its new position once the dbus call arrives at the compositor after the window has been created. Basically, it ends up with a race condition where under certain circumstances, things look like they're completely bugged out. In addition, with the compositor being in control over the final placement, I also see no reason why this call should be permission controlled at all. At the end of the day, all that is being suggested by the application, by the client, by the window, is a hint about where they want to be, not a requirement for where they have to be. Now, when I was first planning this, it was about 4 or so hours after the MR was made, and there was this many comments. There's quite a few more now. I don't know what is going to happen here. What I do know is there is a lot more discussion being had than in that original thread. This is completely silent as of a year ago. Here, we're seeing a lot of discussion, plus there are desktops like Brodie that are in favor of implementing this. But when I normally talk about a Wayland protocol, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, we're 4 days in. Nothing on Wayland happens quickly. This is going to be a very, very long problem. Even if this does get dealt with, I would not expect to see this at least for like a year or two. But the discussion had to start somewhere. Maybe it's just copium, but after the events of late, I have fairly high hopes for Wayland. A lot of things that have been problems for a very long time are being addressed. Things are changing in the Wayland space, and we actually are seeing deficiencies in the Wayland protocol being addressed. Whether this one is going to be, I don't know. But I definitely want it to be. So if you're at all involved in the Wayland space, please do get involved in this thread, explaining your stance in it, why you think it's a good idea even if it's a bad idea, if you think you have a better idea about how it could be done, do get involved. There is a lot of discussion to still be had. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you want Windows to have the ability to suggest where they want to be placed? Or do you think that's just a relic of the past? I would love to know. So if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the LiberaPay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and hopefully the outro is not silent today.